In tonight's episode of Doctor Who, the Doctor and her friends conspire to ensure that an innocent woman gets arrested. Hang on. Okay, Rosa is the third episode of Series 11 of Doctor Who, written by Mallory Blackman and Chris Chibnall, and directed by Mark Tondere. And the thing is, until this thing aired, and I know I wasn't alone here, I was really worried about this one. Would it be cheesy? Would it be condescending? Historically inaccurate? Preachy? Maybe she just needed the Doctor to give her that little push to become brilliant. Dear Lord, we lucked out by not getting that. Because this is one big guest historical character you really can't do that with. The importance of Rosa Parks as an icon entirely depends on her being an ordinary woman who just had enough. Now, one episode of a dumb sci-fi show wasn't going to wreck her reputation. It would just be really uncomfortable to watch. And, well, nah, they kind of nailed it. Rosa's the best of the season so far. It's moving, it made me think, it made me cry, and in terms of historical accuracy, well, maybe this lady knows something about that.
The front seats were occupied, and there's one man, a white man, standing. And then at this point, the driver asked us to stand up and let him have those seats.
I'm gonna need those seats
and
back
when he said, y'all make it light on yourselves and let me have those seats. And when the policeman approached me, one of them spoke and asked me if the driver had asked me to stand. I said, yes.
Stand up now.
He said, why don't you stand up? I said, I don't think I should have to stand up.
Are you going to stand up?
No.
If you don't stand, I'm gonna have you arrested.
You may do that.
And to think we were worried it was going to be a bad episode of Quantum Leap. Turns out we were wrong. It was a great episode of Quantum Leap, and by proxy a great episode of Doctor Who, because Doctor Who has never done Quantum Leap before. That's not an insult, by the way. I freaking love Quantum Leap. In fact, I'm going to argue that the Quantum Leapishness of this episode is what made it work in the first place. So there. Some of the best Doctor Who stories ever have been the result of throwing the Doctor and company at an existing genre to see what happens. Frankenstein, James Bond, puzzle platformer, EastEnders, absurdist dystopia. And one of the many, many, many things that makes Rosa interesting is that it blatantly sets itself out to be a pastiche of a genre you probably didn't even know was a genre. I'm going to call it put the pieces back on the board time travel. And it's rare for this show. Doctor Who's approach to time travel comes out of an H.G. Wells kind of place normally, exploring the past and/or future and/or getting caught up in events and affecting the outcome more by accident than on purpose. That's been part of the series forever, honestly. The first Doctor flat out tells Barbara that she can't change history, not one line, in the Aztecs, and that whole story is a struggle between the desire to interfere and the knowledge that there are some things you really can't mess with. Fixed points in time, and so on. The put the pieces back on the board approach, which I hate that name, it's really ungainly, that has more of a proactive and yet reactive take on the genre, and no surprise that it tends to come out of more American genre fiction. What you'll find is a lot more stories about striving to put right what once went wrong. The status quo might not be the best thing, but it beats the alternative. Think Back to the Future, Star Trek IV, and yeah, Quantum Leap. In Back to the Future, Marty needs to make sure his parents actually meet. Star Trek IV, we gotta save the world by saving the whales. Quantum Leap, well, Dr. Sam Beckett needs to make sure the pretty lady's ex-husband doesn't murder her so she can become a world champion ping pong player and he can kiss her. I just made that plot line up off the top of my head. Belisario, if you're out there, call me. By my reckoning, Doctor Who, a show that has 55 years of time travel stories under its belt, has only done the put history back where you found it thing 3 times before now. And if you don't count like rebooting the universe or time is reversing or like, we need to get out of this season quick, it's the Time Meddler and maybe the War Games, depending on whose perspective you look at it from, and Father's Day. And that's kind of the big one, but that's about it. Since 2005, The Who has tended towards celebrity historicals, where the Doctor and friends go back to 800 time and meet a big historic person. And they team up with that big historic person to fight the monster of the week. And that monster of the week usually has some connection with that person. Shakespeare fights witches with poetry. Vincent van Gogh fights an invisible monster / metaphor for mental illness. And Richard Nixon helps fight aliens that leave 18.5-minute gaps in your memory. There's usually an, oh, that explains it moment. Like, oh, that explains why Agatha Christie disappeared for a couple of weeks back in the 20s. And also why one of her books has a B, I guess. That one was weird. Rosa Parks? Strange choice for a celebrity historical. First off, she's mostly famous for one thing. As a human being, as an activist, as an advocate for African Americans, she gave a lot of herself every day of her life. I mean, this is her protesting against apartheid when she's in her 70s. She was awesome. But her significance as a historical figure and cultural icon comes down to one choice she made on one night. But that leads us to number 2. It was an exceptionally brave and impactful choice that she made. So doing the, oh, that's why she didn't give up her seat on the bus moment is inevitably going to come off as, yeah, because we know why. If you hadn't noticed, she's already fighting a monster. So like, how do you even with this story? Well, the production team figured out, let's say someone stopped her from doing that thing she's famous for. She's a seamstress, you say? Have the TARDIS team stitch history back together. How do they do it without stepping all over her story? Same way Dr. Sam Beckett almost never told anyone that he wasn't actually who they thought he was. Same way Marty got his parents to fall in love. You work around the edges. Rip a jacket so Rosa has to work late. Take a guy out for a beer. Offer friendship. Fix a bus. And that slightly hands-off, slightly removed, pulling strings around the edges approach might be the best, if not only way to do a historical story based on Rosa Parks. Because while our heroes are pretty busy putting right what once went wrong, they're staying out of Rosa Parks' way. And the whole point of Rosa Parks as a historical icon is that decision that she made based on her own experiences. It's not a victory if the Doctor wins for her. It only works if the team puts the pieces back on the board right where they were and then gets out of her way. But it's still a Doctor Who celebrity historical, so it still has to have a, oh, that explains it moment. It still has to have a monster of the week. It still has to have our heroes getting old school swept up in history. And it does. It actually has all of those things. It's just that those things look a little different this time around. Vinette Robinson is perfectly cast. She's playing Rosa as the person she really appears to have been. The kind, quiet seamstress you'd least expect to spark a revolution, but the person with the inner strength and dignity to stand up for herself and her community when the time came. Also, she's a Zygon. I'm lying, she's clearly the Ronnie. No, I'm lying about that too, but weren't you worried when you heard about this episode? You get what I'm saying? You get what I'm saying. All right, so what about the rest of it? Well, they capture the setting and era beautifully. The Doctor and friends arrive in Montgomery, Alabama. Graham's excited about meeting Elvis because it's 1955, and the Doctor knows Elvis because was there any doubt, folks? Come on, the Doctor knows Elvis. Anyway, it's a beautiful day outside. That Ryan sure is a thoughtful kid. Look at him. Oh. And from this moment forward, it becomes clear that the monster of the week is, well, it's Montgomery, Alabama in 1955. Every camera angle suggests a threat, like how the cop car just slides into shot. Our heroes don't know they're being watched. It's like Jason Voorhees has been watching the campers this whole time. Or the way the cop takes up just a little too much space in the motel room. He's a constant, persistent presence. The style in the episode is almost all tight shots and cold lighting. Everything is unnerving in exactly the same way it probably would be if you were Ryan and Yaz and you got dropped in the middle of Montgomery, Alabama in 1955.
Otherwise, how come I get stopped way more by the police than white me's?
One of the few times where the visual palette shifts is the scene in Rosa Parks' house. Suddenly we feel like we can breathe. Warm lighting, spacious angles. Rosa's house, which is pretty small, feels a lot bigger than the claustrophobic, if physically larger, restaurant. And then Ryan dorks out over meeting Martin Luther King because, I mean, who wouldn't? Because that's awesome. He's right there, man. He's like right there.
Martin Luther King? That's correct. Oh my days.
Reverend King even offers condolences for Ryan's Nan. This is the first episode this season that feels less like a series of great moments strung together by filler and more like an episode where every single beat, moment, character, and aspect matters. Yaz is in the position of being neither black nor white in a town that judges you based entirely on those terms.
Obviously not a lot of Pakistani heritage around here.
And that's one of the many places where the diversity of the cast becomes a huge benefit. Not just in a, hey, cool, people can see themselves on screen kind of way, but in a, this person's unique perspective sneakily adds a lot more weight to the story than you might think at first glance. Because that moment on the bus ironically drives home the sheer dystopian absurdity of segregation perfectly. Now, I saw some of you folks criticizing this episode online for being over the top or simplistic or too on the nose, and I mean, you're not wrong, but like the reason you're not wrong is because the actual truth of how segregation played out in real life was all of those things, right? You think this guy's over the top? That's because this guy's over the top. He is being over the top because segregation was over the top, because people like him were taught to fear and hate the other so damn hard they couldn't help but react to the tiniest infraction against this ridiculous set of rules by exploding. The guys who lynched Emmett Till were also over the top because they literally murdered a 14-year-old kid for, I swear to God, saying two awkwardly flirty words to a white woman. How else do you describe that reaction other than over the top? Well, okay, evil and racist and revolting, and okay, there's a lot of words for that. But if you're talking about the sheer intensity of their reaction and the level of self-delusion you have to be experiencing in order to do that, yeah, over the top ain't a bad start. A world where a woman can break the law simply by sitting down on a bus, you know, the reason we're all here today, is practically a dystopian satire on its own, except it isn't because it actually happened. And for Pete's sake, don't come in here with over the top, dear Christ. You people. And with that, let's talk about the scene. I think the fact that it really is, without a doubt, the most historically accurate scene in the 55-year run of Doctor Who is incredibly significant. Because it is. It just is. Because after a bunch of plotty McPlot Back to the Future 2-ish hijinks where the gang puts all the pieces back on the board and makes sure that Rosa Parks' moment will happen, there's the Doctor, Ryan, Graham, and Yaz on the bus with Rosa Parks on December 1st, 1955. They're basically forced into the position of having to not just witness, but also take part in Rosa Parks' arrest by helping to create the circumstances under which it happens. And Graham wants no part of it. This is his wife's hero we're talking about here. His late wife, the love of his life, who would be pissed off if she found out that he was involved, and would be even more pissed off if, say, he was directly involved because, oh, let's just say that he was the white guy who happened to be standing up, causing her arrest in the first place, and...
No, I don't want to be part of this.
We have to. I'm sorry.
Damn. People are going to be debating and analyzing this scene for years, because this is a strange episode from a moral standpoint if you think about it. This is the episode where the Doctor and her friends conspire to make sure that an innocent woman gets arrested. Yeah, her arrest sparked a movement. Yeah, it's the thing that was supposed to happen. It's vital to so many people that it happens. It's a singular act of bravery in the face of injustice. And yet, here we are, actually having to watch it, and we can't change it because everything that's happened up to this point has been leading up to this moment. This isn't like the Doctor giving Nero the idea to burn down Rome or inspiring Charles Dickens to write The Mystery of Edwin Drood. This is the Doctor doing everything she can to ensure that Rosa Parks takes her rightful place in history as a woman who got treated so unfairly it drew the attention of the world. And to do that, she has to just sit there. I'm not sure if this is necessarily the check your privilege moment some people are making it out to be, since they know their decision to stay put will work out in the end, even if it breaks their moral core to do it in the moment. But there's truth to that reading anyway, because history is messy, because we can be part of someone else's pain whether we signed up for it or not, and because just because you've put all the pieces back on the board, it doesn't mean it's going to be easy to win. Here's what's really interesting about the Put the Pieces Back time travel story, that so much of that genre deals directly, or at least acknowledges, how hostile a place the past really was. And yeah, that can lead us towards a certain tendency towards, hey, look how racist we used to be. Naughty, naughty, dead people. Sure glad we fixed that in our super enlightened, practically perfect year of 2018. Yeah. And you gotta give them a lot of credit for avoiding this. Especially because it would have been a lot easier to write that script. And the combination of that approach to a time travel historical narrative and Doctor Who's approach draws attention to that fact.
It's not like Rosa Parks wipes out racism from the world forever. Otherwise, how come I get stopped way more by the police than the white mates? Tell me you don't get hustled.
Of course I do. Especially on the job. I get called a Paki when I'm sorting out a domestic or a terrorist on the way home from the mosque.
Yeah, exactly.
But they don't win, those people. I can be a police officer now because people like Rosa Parks fought those battles for me. For us.
Don't take money, don't take fame. Don't need no credit card to ride this train. It's strong and it's sad and it's cruel sometimes, but it might just save your life. That's the power of love.
Also, there's this evil, racist, handsome time traveler from the future. We should really talk about him.